Okay.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here on Monday just before our next meeting. This is the special meeting of the Downers Grove Grade School District 38 Board of Education, Monday, February 3rd, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. at the Administrative Services Center. Melissa, will you please call roll?
I forgot my list. One moment. Member Hannon. Here. Member Harris.
Here.
Member Hughes.
Here.
Member Doshi.
Here.
Member Weiner. Here. Member Olczyk.
Here.
And Member Smonty.
Here.
All right. So, Dr. Russell, if you want to go ahead and introduce Paul.
So, first off, welcome everyone. I appreciate everyone coming in for a special meeting. Paul, just so you know, in the audience, we only have two members here. We have Justin Sissel, our assistant superintendent, and then Katie from the task force. She also represents our union. So, welcome, Katie. We appreciate you both being here. Just as kind of a brief introduction to the board, when we had met Paul and voted on having Paul, we talked about a process. And as the task force goes through recommendations throughout the process, one of the things that we committed to as a board is kind of a check or a safety valve, is that before any recommendation would be implemented, that we would come back to the Board of Education. So the Board of Education had a chance to ask questions, made sure that everything was clear, and nothing would move forward without the board being comfortable, so to speak. And so that's why we're here. Given the complexity of everything that we're doing with our task force, we're at a critical juncture in terms of grade reconfiguration and whether or not to pursue that. So what I wanted to do before we just got into Paul and turned it over to Paul was just answer the question, why are we here tonight? I can only type so much and try and synthesize all that, but really why we're here tonight is at the last task force meeting I talked about, we started off way over here, and the last task force meeting kind of got us to this point. And as Paul had pointed out before, one of the biggest dominoes that has to fall in our whole conversation here is whether or not we should be pursuing grade level reconfiguration. And if we do pursue that, then other dominoes will fall behind that. If we don't, other dominoes will not fall, or different ones will fall. So what the task force had done at the last meeting was we got done with our really educational push for the task force. And the task force had made a recommendation to Paul and to the Board of Education that before we go any further, that they would like us to pursue an educational push to the community about not only 6-8 grade level reconfiguration, but about some of these maintenance needs that are out there. While we recognize that many people participated in strategic planning, that this plan really came from the community, there's still a lot of community members and even staff members who might not be aware of why are we even talking about some of these things. And so they recommended almost a 3-prong approach. The first prong would be a informational mailer that would go out. And you saw a sample of that. It has two pieces. The first piece is a letter, and the second piece was that insert that you saw. The second piece that the task force recommended is a way to gauge qualitative feedback and engage the community through community engagement sessions. And we have 4 tentative dates. So that would be the second thing we're asking you to approve tonight. The third thing would be polling behind the whole 6-8 middle school concept and behind some of this maintenance. Obviously, whenever you put a letter like that together, whenever you put an insert, the polling, that's going to draw a lot of questions, especially because of the complexity of what we're about to talk about. So prior to that letter going out or even approving that, we obviously had to bring that in front of the Board of Education to get your feedback to see where you all stand as 7 board members before we initiate any kind of education push. So with that, that's where we're at. You've been given the drafts. Nothing is out there in the public. Nothing will be going out until we all can coalesce behind something, if we can do that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, if that's okay.
That's fine. Yep.
Paul, please feel free to reiterate anything I said or to add to it.
The things that I would add would be that
in the last 20 minutes, I had some ideas of how to refine the letter in the attachment. I think I would assume the big concern is that voters would not understand that these are just options. They're not set in stone, and we really want to get that across to the voter, to the taxpayer. And so one way to modify the letter would just be to highlight the 5th paragraph, the first few sentences of that paragraph that talk about nothing is set in stone, the proposal currently being considered are truly preliminary options, et cetera, et cetera. I think if we highlight that in the letter, that would go a long way. And then the second option would be on the attachment. I took a shot at modifying both the headline and creating kind of a sub-headline, which I have emailed over, and it will be forwarded to you if you already haven't seen it. And in that headline, it reads, 2 preliminary options being considered. That's the headline. And then Downers Grove Grade School District 58, which serves 5,162 students in preschool through 8th grade, is evaluating 2 preliminary options for renovating and repairing 13 schools. No final decisions have been made. Nothing is set in stone. These are truly preliminary options for which we seek your thoughts and recommendations. And so, and then the existing paragraph and before. So those were 2 ideas I had to get across the concept that, again, we're just at this point seeking feedback from the community in terms of various options. When we left the task force meeting at number 2, second task force meeting, I like the fact that the task force liked the idea of pursuing maintenance for 1 to 8 years. That's like a first big decision that they made as a group, as a recommendation. So that then sets the stage for a lot of other things in terms of how this is configured and the total cost and the total tax impact. Then the second is asking them, should we share and test a proposal that includes grade reconfiguration? And they said yes. Don't just test it, but you have to educate the public about grade reconfiguration before you ever tested it. And I said, it's $226 million. Do you want to test it? And they said, yes, we definitely want to test it. Because if we don't test it, then we're never going to know. And if we never know, the board's probably never going to put this on the ballot. And if they don't put it on the ballot now, it's probably going to be many years before it ever would be put on the ballot, if ever. So, and then the other thoughts of why would you test grade reconfiguration is that there's just a ton of benefits tied to it, as we featured in the letter. But at the same time, it's I understand the board's concern that it's a big number, and what tone does that set moving forward? So I feel your pain and I feel your concerns in testing that. My rule of thumb that I always talk to boards about is that Plan A and Plan B, which I talked about a month ago with the board. Plan A is what you truly believe voters will support. Plan B is something ratcheted back from that. And so right now I don't know that we're at a Plan A, and it sort of puts us in an awkward position in having to test it.
Hey Paul, I don't want to interrupt you, but this is Steve Olchek. Can you repeat what your definition of Plan A is?
Yeah, Plan A is what you truly believe voters will support.
We haven't defined it yet. That's what the committee wants to
okay,
get to.
So when we have option A, that's a different term than
So
plan.
I'm just saying that in general, if I was, as I work with a new client, they always say, geez, what should we potentially put on the ballot? What should we test? And my comeback has always been, and it's worked well, is you test what you truly believe voters will support.
But you're saying that's going to be our second round of testing because we don't have so-called plans yet.
Correct. So this is like this preliminary before that. We're kind of And that's why we all feel kind of awkward about it, because we're put in a situation where it's a big number and it's kind of tough to test because it is so large.
Well, and that's why, this is Darren Hughes. One of the things that when you were talking about it, and you're talking about them as preliminary options, I don't know about the phrasing yet, but what popped into my head was that we have two potential starting points or something along those lines of,
Right.
Because where I'm looking at this from is we went to the community. We went to the community and asked them what was important to them, and we also did some analysis on our facilities. We combined those two things together, and we created this huge proposal, which is quite honestly just too large, I think, even for this board's comfort. I don't want to speak for everybody, but they'll have the opportunity. But I certainly think for the community at large. But we know that it is from this, we need the community's help in prioritizing and deciding where those. Now that we've seen the dollars that go along with it, how important is that issue still to you? And my fear when I look at a little bit of the documentation we have here, and the letter, I saw the iterations of the letter, so that I think is getting closer to where we need it to be. But like when I look at this document with the two columns, there's still something very binary about it that I have two choices to pick from, as opposed to this being the beginning of a journey that we're taking together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess I'm sorry, Paul, I was just going to add something to what Darren says. I think when I first read this on Friday, my knee-jerk reaction was that it's going to potentially be interpreted as though we're presenting a plan of $226 million, and I don't think anyone, or I don't want to speak for everyone, but I definitely don't support putting a plan for $226 million for it. So it's what I was kind of grappling with in my mind today is, how do you kind of get this out there to the community, but not have it be interpreted as this is the plan that we're proposing.
And Paul, I guess this is Kirat Doshi. A question for you on, in essence, the directive that you're perceiving from your expertise from the task force. I heard you say something to the effect of the task force wants us to test grade reconfiguration, and that is $226 million. And those feel like two very different thoughts. Mm-hmm. Did the task force say that they want us to test grade reconfiguration, or did they say they want us to test 226?
They first made the decision, there was a question, do you like the concept of going for maintenance for years 1 through 8? And if so, it's X amount of dollars. And they said, yeah, we don't think it would be wise if we go for example, 4 years of maintenance. It makes more sense to address the lion's share of your maintenance needs, because it would be a disaster to have to come back to the voter just a few years later and say, hey, we need more money for maintenance. They thought that would be a bad idea. They liked the idea 1 through 8. And so when you look at that number, that's $97.3 million just for that. So now everything kind of springboards from that. All of a sudden, right, originally kind of started thinking, well, geez, if we just did 4 years of maintenance, then all of a sudden we add the grade reconfiguration, then we're still at a halfway decent number. But right away, when maintenance is $97.3 million, all of a sudden everything starts to look really big. However, they heard a really great presentation about the pros and cons of grade reconfiguration. And they kind of, I think, looked at each other and said, how could you not test that? Based on the potential benefits, not just the benefits for the 6th grade student, but district-wide where you're freeing up space throughout the district. So they were kind of, I can't say cornered, but they wanted to test it, but the only way to test it is kind of to test that bigger number unless some other things drop off. And they obviously saw the benefit of health, safety, and security in terms of secure vestibules, and they liked, improving indoor environments in terms of ventilation, natural lighting, temperature, all those things resonated with them. They didn't like the idea of just certain schools getting that. They felt every child should have that, obviously, secure vestibules. So that's where that's where it ended. It was a long 3-hour meeting, and at the end they just said we really think you should go test this larger amount that includes grade reconfiguration, and then if you'd like to, have an option B, which would probably be that 190, to test as well on the pole. So it's a different approach than them saying, okay, we have a plan A, and this is what we truly believe voters will support. It's 113 million, and that's what I sometimes hear. But this time, because we threw in this grade reconfiguration concept, coupled with this large maintenance number, they kind of didn't have a choice but to say, hey, we want to try and test 226.
And just to jump it in my opinion, you saw two things that I saw happen at the task force, and Tracy, please, feel free to jump in if I'm getting it wrong. You had the overwhelming majority of people at the task force really liked this idea of 6-8 middle schools for a variety of reasons conceptually. I think Justin hit it on the park with kind of the pros to why we would go to the final, and then also looking at some of the cons to that. But I really think people got excited about this concept of 6-8 middle school and about aligning with the rest of the county and all of that. I also think you have a strong contingent of elementary parents, particularly on the north side, who not only support 6-8 middle schools, but view this as a chance to get more room back in their elementary schools. And so I think that's why you also saw a lot of good positive momentum toward testing that, because they saw in some of the north side schools like your Highland or your Pierce Downer or some of those schools or Leicester that might be a little bit more crowded, they saw that as a way to alleviate some space there. So that was kind of what I was witnessing in terms of the momentum behind 6-8 middle school. Then there was also a strong contingent of people saying that, look, before you move anything further, you need to either rule this in or rule this out, because this is a huge piece of your, will eventually be your plan A and plan B, and you got to get an answer to this question before you start moving forward with any kind of a push, so to speak. So then everybody kind of coalesced behind, well, let's test this thing and see where it's at. Again, though, as we pointed out many times, when you look at the dollar amounts, and then kind of people pull back and go, oh, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. I thought my impression of that night was that it was emphatic, the 8 years of maintenance, and they wanted to test the middle schools. But I didn't perceive it as a coupling of the 226 with it. I thought that they were just talking about the ideas and those individual line items, not like the entire Plan A package. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that becomes the difficult thing, though, and this is where I'll default with Paul, is when you add those two together, though, you start to get those big dollar amounts, and then you got to test that big dollar amount. I don't know, and maybe, Paul, you can shed light on this, because I'm not necessarily disagreeing with what you said, Tracy, because I agree with you. Could we test concepts and not dollar amounts? Is that what you were thinking about, Tracy?
Because, I didn't think it was a slam dunk on the indoor environment in the room, like in the individual table talk, and not everyone was into the secure vestibule. Well, yeah. One or two people weren't that into the secure vestibule idea.
Yeah.
So I thought that or flex furniture, that didn't get fought. That really wasn't the main focus of the meeting.
No, I definitely think in terms of airtime in the conversation, security and 6-8 middle school has definitely dominated the conversation.
Well, and we do know that 6-8 middle schools are going to cost us just under $55 million if our estimates are accurate. And so I don't think we want to necessarily hide what the impact of that cost, because it's got to come into account, right? What do you want 6-8 middle schools? By the way, that is a big price tag piece that goes along with it, whether that's roped in. I think where I struggle overall, and this is where I had hoped we would be a little bit further along, and is where in these big buckets that we have are the sub-buckets that are underneath there that we potentially have to shore up a little bit. Like, are there things inside the maintenance bucket that are good but not absolutely necessary? What things in the health, safety, and security, are there things that we could trim back? Like, maybe you don't go air conditioning, or maybe you do, maybe you cut this. Like, at some point we got to start a la carte, right? Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we have to do, and I just want to make sure that what we're presenting teeing us up to have the bigger. And ultimately, I read this like the letter is, is the call to action to come to the. I think our call to action is really to get people to come to those community engagement events. But if we don't have a good understanding of these buckets and what we can move around, what we can shift, and what individual costs are, and what things are firm. If you take it out, now all of a sudden you knock down the first two dominoes, but the rest of it stands up because there is dependencies there. Where are those dependencies? Where do they not matter? If you don't upgrade the electrical, you can't do air conditioning. If you don't do this, you can't do that. All of those things are not being investigated enough, I think, to this point, because I personally wouldn't be able to support, at least where we're at right now, something being $226 million. I just don't think that is a burden that we can go out and ask for. I'm comfortable with sharing that number and saying, hey, we listened to you, we heard you, but this is what it cost. Help us now prioritize and clean up and get this to a point where we've got a good option A, option B.
So is it kind of getting to that level where in part of the messaging we say that we're putting forward a large number, 226, but we need to scale that back and we need your help to prioritize?
Yeah, that it's some kind of, I see it as a starting point.
Well, Paul, in the information, in the mailer and the polling and stuff, isn't the goal for us to gauge what their appetite or temperature is, but also not shut them off so that we can, if they automatically just fold their hands up in the air and they're like, no way, that's not going to have a valuable conversation moving forward. Hey, okay, you don't like that, but what do you know what I'm saying? How do we get it so we still draw out the good conversation of fleshing this out further as opposed to just turning everyone off? Does that make sense?
So what I always tell clients is that the voter looks to you as the experts. They look to district staff and the board as the experts. You wake up every day thinking about this, they don't. And so we can't expect them to kind of do an a la carte detailing of this. They would turn to you to say, what's your plan A? What's your plan B? What do you truly believe the district needs, at the same time respecting the taxpayer? What's that A look like? What's the B look like? There's an option of testing a plan A that doesn't include grade reconfiguration, and then kind of layering on grade reconfiguration. And we talked about that a little bit in the task force meeting. And then there's the option of showing the big amount and then kind of peeling it back. And they went back and forth, and they finally said, we think maybe we should share that larger number and then peel it back as the plan B. So, it's up to you as the board how you present that. You could present it you could look at maybe that option D and scale it back a bit, eliminating some of those line items. And then as a kind of follow-up question in the poll to ask about grade reconfiguration definitely without hiding the cost. I mean, in seeing what response you get. So there's a variety of ways to test it. The other option I mentioned to the group, which they did not want to do, which is what some of the larger cities and larger school districts throughout the country will do, is before trying to do a full-blown public information campaign, they will simply do a phone poll. And they will test a larger size proposal with all its moving parts, just to get a sense, are we crazy even asking for this, even testing it? Before they do a full-blown public information program. And they didn't like that idea because they felt like that grade reconfiguration would only be supported if people had a clue what the benefits are. They felt that most people wouldn't understand the benefits, or if they just all of a sudden were caught off guard with a phone poll, there wouldn't be enough time to really understand the benefits in a quick phone poll. So they did like the idea of educating voters about grade reconfiguration and then doing the polling. The other thing is that we set a March 24 date for the next task force meeting. So things are fluid. We don't have to rush to get this done. I think that we should step back for a little bit and make sure that whatever letter in attachment we send out is truly what we want, and to make sure we dial it in properly. So I want to do whatever makes you feel comfortable. I don't think, no matter what number we share, you're always going to get negative feedback because a tax is a tax. However, and I totally sympathize with some of those who are concerned about 226 because I think it's a big number. I don't know if we share that large of a number. Is there a way to kind of dial that back?
So
I'm concerned about it.
So just to help us move this conversation forward, I'll just put it on the table as table stakes. I think I would not support putting out a 226 number to the community. I think we'll come off as tone deaf, and we will come off as not having looked at the numbers for historical bond proposals to the community that were in the tens of millions of dollars range and had a 50% up-down rate, or in terms of approval rate. My bias is to ultimately get us to the point where we are polling something that we aren't sure would or would not be supported. Right now, what's on the page, I feel very convinced that neither of those will be supported.
Correct.
Anywhere close to 50% of the vote. And the other table stakes thing that I'll put out there is just having gone through the facility planning process, we have needs as a district for capital investment. That is very clearly a need. And so it's not a question for me of do we ask the community or not. It's what do we ask the community. But I just want to put all of that out there as table stakes for this conversation so that we can start to talk about backward planning from the end in mind. And so from backward planning from the end in mind, what I'd like to have by the end of March is results from a poll where we didn't know as a board or as a district administration whether the community would or wouldn't support it. Right now, these numbers don't get me there. And I'd like for us to start talking about it from the perspective of a number that we think the community might support. And maybe half of us are like, yep, the community might support that, and half of us are saying, you know what, absolutely not, the community won't. And that's the right spot to be in, I think. As a group, as an entity of 7 independent folks, I think that's the right spot that I'd like for us to get to, where we have a number that half of us feel good about and the other half don't. And then we plan backward from there to say, what can we get for that number? How much maintenance? How much safety and security? How much reconfiguration of grades? And the answer to some of those might be none or zero of it. And some of it might be that we have to backscale or reduce the asks around maintenance or safety and security and so on. But I'd like to start with, because of the work that's already been done, I'd like to start with the conversation around what is a number that we feel comfortable with, and then figure out how, Paul, with your expertise in your team, help us understand how do we test something like that with a forward poll so that we, at the end of the next 60 days, I'd like for us to be able to look and point to data to say, here's what the community is telling us, and because we position the ask in a very particular way, we can say with high confidence, here's what the community would support. And then the last thing that I'll share is, I think we have one shot at this. Community engagement, mailers, polling. Anybody that's not as plugged into the district as much as we are, which is almost every other person in this village, just because, for the nature of people that don't have time and aren't as attuned with the needs of each of their buildings. And they've asked us to go do this work. We have one shot to be able to bring the community up to speed around our outreach. And I put our mailer, our phone polling, and our community engagement sessions all under one roof as that is our shot. Let's make sure we are messaging very clearly, having done the hard work and the hard trade-offs. We're messaging very clearly through each of those sessions, one story, one line, so that we're going to reach some people one way, some people another, but I doubt that we will reach multiple people in multiple ways through each of those methods. And so we have this one shot to be able to understand and educate the community and also get the data back ourselves on what the community might support.
Well said, Karat. And I just want to add one component to that, and that's the idea of not hiding the number that doing everything did. I think we were comfortable about because we've talked about it. Like that got reported back to us. Hey, if you did everything in your strategic plan, this is what it would cost. But the idea of testing a number that not only do I not think would pass in a referendum, I don't think that number would pass a vote for the board to put onto the ballot. So to test a number that we wouldn't actually attempt to get anyway, does it make sense? To share the number in an effort to say, if we're trying to get people to come in and help us identify what areas they're still prioritizing, and if we want that kind of feedback, then having a number of going, everything costs this, so, this is your opportunity to, if there's something that's really important to you, as we start working on trimming this back, this is your opportunity to have your voice heard. That is a different thing to me than stating this is a legitimate option when I don't think that most of us feel that it is. But I just wanted to add that as well.
I concur with you 100%. So I guess my thought is, okay, so now what? I mean, I guess I'm confused on how the process works.
Yeah.
What Darren Kratz said is exactly what I'm thinking. There's not 4 votes at this table to get this on the ballot. So why put something very tone deaf out in front of the community when we know we're not even going to support it anyway, between the 7 of us? So
I propose that where we go next, and I'm going to have other ideas, but just to push the conversation forward, I propose that we start to debate a number that we think the community might support, and start to understand where the folks are on that.
And I would even kind of push that a little bit further, like before we get to the number. I think we're trying to solve 5 different problems with this. So we're trying to fix aging buildings, overcrowding in some buildings. The one thing that we don't really talk about, we're addressing the fact that we didn't budget for capital budgeting at all for the last 30 years. That's why you got that $97.3 million. We want to create future-ready learning. Everybody, you get that in front of the task force. Everybody loves it, right? Everybody loves the new school. So that's another problem we're trying to address. And I think the one area that we still haven't even scratched the surface on is whether we have, 11 elementary schools and 2 junior highs with 6 to 8 or 7 to 8. Is that model sustainable for the long term? And so those are kind of 5 problems that I have in my head circling around, and they all end up blending together in some fashion. So with this community engagement, which one of those 5 or 2 or 3 are we trying to solve?
Well, and that's why I thought the preliminary part of it was to decide whether or not the core was going to be around grade configuration, or whether the core was going to be around our maintenance and other future-ready learning. Like, we know that we can't tick all 4 of these boxes that are on here, right? So, what are we? I guess what I don't know, and this is why us coming up with a number is a.
I like that idea, but it's which of those are we trying to solve with that number? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a fair prioritization exercise for us to debate.
Because part of the idea with this task force was, helping us refine down to some core stuff, and I don't know that we're there yet. And so, but there's this desire to learn about how important 6 through 8 middle schools are. Is that something that we want to build on and build out from there, or do we want to build elsewhere?
Here's I'm just going to go ahead and say the unpopular thing. I think that the 6-8 middle schools is awesome. I love the idea. And I know that we're going to get really great support from the community if we go out there and say, hey, doesn't this sound awesome? Everyone's going to say, yeah, it sounds awesome. It makes sense. It's good for our kids. But so does me buying a boat. So I can't afford that, though. So I don't see, we cannot scale back on our maintenance projects in order to afford 6-8 middle schools. That's the single non-negotiable, is to make sure our aging infrastructure doesn't fall apart. We have to take care of our buildings. Otherwise, the 6-8 middle school experience will be the greatest experience ever. But if the kids at the elementary buildings have the roofs are caving on them, then what have we done to the community? So I think we have to just approach this with absolutely prioritizing what has to be done. And while I understand that referenda often get passed when there's something sexy, that stuff that sells. But what we really need to do is a very unsexy, hey, our buildings are falling apart. We need help. And I think that's I don't know how to sell that, because that's the hardest thing to sell. But frankly, that's where we need to be, making the community aware of we are we are in kind of dire straits with our crumbling buildings, and we need $100 million, and $100 million is probably basically all the community is going to give us. I mean, like if you think about 99's referendum, it was $150 million. They had bonds rolling off, and their EAV is twice as large. So I mean, like that, the increase to the average family was $65 a year. This is going to be quite a bit larger, and I'm concerned that everything here sounds awesome, but I think we just know that there are limitations that the community is not going to be able to absorb, and that's my main. That's what keeps me up at night.
I have a question, Paul. Because I was on the 99 task force when we first met, there was 4 meetings, and it was 136 and 86. Was there polling and stuff before the end user, the task force, even got to see anything? So is this part of the natural process of like how we are doing it here? So was there a poll before I saw you and met you at that District 99 meeting?
No. So there were 2 different proposals, and the reason there were 2 different proposals is that one of the proposals resulted not in an increase in the net tax rate because of debt rolling off, and then the other one addressed the needs that they identified as their highest priority needs. So we did not do any polling until the task force said, hey, let's go out and do a split sample. We'll test the larger proposal, and then we'll test a smaller proposal. The smaller proposal, again, being one that does not require a tax rate increase, or at least a net tax rate increase. And that's how we did it, and that's how we always do it. This is, the only time that Marcia's not here, but the only time that I've worked on measures where we do a preliminary benchmark poll is with very large school districts, like City of Denver Public Schools or St. Green Valley Schools. 50,000 students, etc. And we don't roll out an education plan. We simply, to the voter, we simply do a poll. And we get the results back, and we look at each other and say, okay, well, that was a good idea, or that was a bad idea. And then we move on. So that's what the task force said, we don't want to do that. We would prefer to educate the voter on this. So I love the discussion so far. I want you to know that that maintenance is sexy. It sounds funny, but that is the truth. When we do polling, the 2 things that will rise to the top are going to be safety and security, as well as the health factor as well. Second to that will be maintenance, protecting what you already own. That's what voters care about. So will grade reconfiguration rise to the top? No. It'll be below those 2 options.
So one of the things, just for the people that weren't at the task force meeting, Darren couldn't make it, but one of the people at one of the tables mentioned that instead of having this like Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, as was outlined at the meeting, was to have an A1, like all in, like everything, the kitchen sink, an A2, which is like a scaled down version of middle school, including middle school, and then a B1 and B2. So I went home and I started a la carting stuff on here to come up with other scenarios that were maybe more palatable, because I concur with you and Greg. I would say, even if the task force said yes, I would still say no to the $500 million, which was
$250 million.
$250 million.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
That's what I said.
Crazy. Come on.
Yeah. So if Paul's saying that like maintenance is sexy, I mean, you could do middle school maintenance 1 through 8, years 1 through 8, and take playgrounds off, and that brings it down a little bit, and do secure vestibules, and that would be $155 million. Okay, so that's still a lot. You could do maintenance, no playgrounds, and do air conditioning and flexible furniture, and that'd be $147. Like there's play here. There's things
absolutely.
There's lots of options here that will take care of maintenance and be palatable to the taxpayer.
But sorry.
No, we have to come up with a way to find out, though, if the grade reconfiguration want is there or not. Because if it's not, and it's not going to be supported, then why are we even
I think
we
what you're
wouldn't have
suggesting and
that.
what Tracy's suggesting can be possible in the same school.
Right? Because I will say, people with younger kids who can see the future really differently than I can, because I'm 50 years old.
50 years young.
Right. That 6th to 8th grade, to prepare them for high school to get into an amazing job and or college, is like on their minds. I haven't thought of that yet for my daughter because I'm old school and you didn't think about that till high school. But people think about these things really, really early on, like even when they have their kids. So I think we just need to find out whether this is what Downers Grove wants. And if they say yes, and we will fund it, then we include it. If not, then it's not worth putting on and spending all this time on that.
And to me, grade configuration serve two purposes. One, or a couple. One, it's what we've been hearing from people, the model that they want. There's a longer stretch that kids spend in school.
Yes.
Two, it really does align better with state standards. The kids would get their lab experience.
Again,
things that they
my
don't.
dad doesn't care about any
doesn't.
of this because
Right.
he is old school and has lived here and seen his kids go through things not like this.
Right. But
So
then there's number 3, and that gets to Steve's
Steve, that-
perspective. One of the things that I liked about grade reconfiguration, and I'm not saying that I've fallen on one side of the fence or not yet. Like, it all depends on what we get our final piece down to. Is does that start getting our district to a more sustainable model where you take pressure off of all of our individual buildings? Years down the road, when you have shifting demographics, does it give us more options as far as boundaries or losing a building or gaining? Do we have more options down the road when we take some of that pressure off of our small buildings that are really busting at the seams? We don't have, it's tough to feed these kids at lunch. It's hard to get them into gym class, all of those kind of things. And so when I look at the history we have of kicking a can down the road and getting really nervous because I see the end of the road and knowing that we have to fix something, one of the things I'm looking at is not only solving a problem that we have today, but setting up a sustainable thing so that board members that are sitting here in the future and who's ever sitting in your seat 20 years from now is having a different conversation, right?
To push that even further, if we kind of look at, then push that even further, if we look at the 226 number that none of us support, are we still going to have to come back to the community 8 years from now and ask for more money? Well, there you go. I probably won't be here either.
Yes.
I didn't hear your question. You guys want
So we're putting forth this 226 number that nobody supports.
Right.
We kind of got past that, and we got $97.3 million for maintenance that covers 8 years. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Correct.
Yes.
So where's that maintenance funding going to come from in year 9?
So let me jump in there with what I heard from the task force in terms. The reason why we're only talking years 1 through 8 maintenance and not years 9 through 12 is because your capacity to borrow money when you have to spend that money. You're not going to be borrowing money next year to spend 12 years down the road. And so one of the things that we will be going through with the FAC, and we have a preliminary draft for the FAC to review, is a very robust fund balance initiative where you would be taking care of years 9 through 12. And that would come from a variety of methods like saving out of your annual budget, but it's not going to get you the whole way there. And then when the Lester bonds come off and the Pierce Downer bonds come off, reissuing some of those to then pay for other long-term maintenance. So kind of a combination of all of the above. So Todd has some real preliminary numbers for the FAC. So that was one thing that they tasked us with. I think, as I sat and listened to the task force the other night, and this is where it was made several times that this is such a more complex issue than what District 99 would have. And please know, I'm not saying that wasn't complex, because that certainly was still complex, but we've got so many different balls up in the air that it becomes very difficult in terms of where's your entry point and not. What was clear to me, though, from the task force is that whatever does not get addressed during this thing, like boundaries, like the administrative center, your question, does it make sense to continue to have 13 operate? Those have to be addressed by the school board. So we have to kind of make a list on what do we want to tackle with this, and then what comes next, and what's that process for how we go about that. So the task force was very clear that, in my view, kicking the can down the road can no longer happen, because we have to, the tricky part here is what gets put on the plate now, and then what's in the batter's box waiting to be addressed next time.
Speaking to that point a little bit, and this is something that was concerning me as I read through the recaps of the task force meetings and then this stuff coming forward, is that the idea that we're not going to address any of those types of issues right now. Like, not that we're not going to address them, but we're going to not even talk about them, makes me a little worried that if we go to the community and say we want X amount of dollars, whatever that amount is, and then they say yes. And they say, yes, here's our tax, we trust you. And then a year later we're saying, oh, by the way, now we're going to change your boundaries or close your school or whatever. People are going to think that we weren't being transparent, we weren't being open with what we wanted. And I think after they just agreed and put their trust in us to spend their money responsibly or the way that they feel is best, that might look a little disingenuous, and I'm a little concerned about that message.
Or not even not transparent or disingenuous. I think it shows that maybe we didn't think through contingency planning, and we're just trying to create that wish list and, well, just give us your money, trust us. And I think those even if we sent this out as is, those questions are going to come very quickly, so why not have those answers prepared ahead of time? So I don't know. I think we need to, I'll say the unpopular thing. I think we need to look at that 13 school model much harder at this point in time.
The people on the task force were very, very, very adamant that they did not. They said that was not their job to talk about or to test.
Yeah,
It was up to us and the administration to decide.
Right.
Emily, I really appreciate your point, because the one thing we want to be extremely careful with our task force is that we are being always transparent with our community and making sure that whatever isn't addressed. So one of the things that the task force said was, though, for those things that we don't address, there has to be a robust community engagement process behind those things, so our taxpayers don't feel like they were the victims of some sort of bait and switch, or we didn't tell you about that, or anything like that. With the boundary question in particular, because we spent a ton of time analyzing that, does it make sense, does it not make sense? We reviewed the dollar amounts and all that. That one in particular, they were very cautious about combining that with some of these things. And Steve, I totally understand what you're saying as well, too, because of just how muddy that would make everything, and then we wouldn't be able to get to some of those other maintenance issues because it would be, confusing the issues with all that. I agree, though, it's very difficult because some of these lists can be trimmed if some of those other decisions get made, and that's a tricky thing. But go ahead, Brad. I'm sorry.
I think that's the challenge that I have with having that debate. If we adjust boundaries, or if we close buildings, that doesn't change the need of the majority of our buildings still needing maintenance. So if one of those solutions was to solve our problems, I'd be happy to start debating that. But I think the honest trade-off that we're facing as a board, and that I think the community is going to have to reckon with, and I think that's where we're looking for input, is are you willing to support maintenance and safety and security investments that we are in dire need of? If I had to build my plan A of what I think the community might support, is I agree with Paul. I think maintenance is sexy and people love knowing that their schools are safe and sustainable. If that's something that you as a community cannot support, then we have other options that we'll have to then explore. One of those is we'll have to start thinking about our boundary adjustments. We will have to start thinking about closing down buildings. We just can't sustainably, given our books, reasonably support all of those investments.
And that's a good point, because and Emily, your point's great. Thank you for bringing it up. Certainly, we want to be transparent. We want to be genuine with the community. But we might have to close buildings or we adjust boundaries either way.
Right.
Whether we get the money or whether we don't. I mean, that's a solution for both sides of that problem.
And it just may look very, very different.
Right.
And that's why
Highland's going to be a problem unless you can move 6 out. I mean, if we can move 6 out, then Highland's not a problem anymore. It's just going to bubble up somewhere else. It's going to bubble up maybe in another building, and then we have a building that's too small, and I don't know.
Or the problem is slightly different, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, so we might have fixed one problem at Highland, but it exacerbates another problem, or LCR now becomes a different. There's things that come up, and I think that level of discussion has to be task force and engage with the community at the exact same level that we're doing all of this. This is not something that we would go, great, we got your money, now let's just start doing some of these things. I think it would really be involved with engaging them. And so you're right, like, there's no way this can ever be a boogeyman. Like, if we don't do this, then we're closing a building, because either way you could make decisions that, hey, you know, if we were able to expand the 6th grade middle school, maybe it makes sense to redraw all these lines and get rid of a building. I'm not saying that that's what we would do, but maybe that is what we, or even a future board several years from now, once this structure is in place and functioning well, would decide to do.
Right.
1,000. We always got to think about what it's into 1,000.
I know a little while ago we talked about that. It wouldn't be in our best interest to use the scare tactic of, this is what it's going to look like if you don't.
Past referendum, we're cutting.
Yeah.
We don't want
But I think by discussing it in advance,
But you have to
is
discuss
exactly what we'd be
it.
doing.
But yes.
Because we'd be pairing those decisions together as if it's a trade-off, and I think the reality is we'd have to be considering those anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But the things that are non-negotiable right now are our maintenance needs and safety and security needs. About $150 million, $155 million. If we can find ways to pare that down to a $100 million number that we think we can set up future boards to then build on and continue to invest in maintenance and safety and security so that we can piecemeal it, I'd like to be able to get to that proposal, because I don't think that the triple-digit $1 million number is something that the community would support for an elementary school district.
Have we had a conversation with White about, like, is this $97.3 million, is that absolutely firm? Like, that is, I mean, is there any way to pare that back at all?
So I'll answer that in a couple of ways. Every number that you see on here, you can pare back. You have to put yourself in White's shoes, though. And again, I'm just going to say what I think, you know, the architects would say. The further you go out with some of these numbers, when you're at years 9 through 12, they are going to inflate those numbers for labor. They're going to inflate those numbers for cost and capital. Because if they put a number out that actually comes in below what it costs, then they're in a world of trouble. So yes, of course these numbers are going to be higher than what I think would actually come in, because you have to pad them to account for some of those costs. The tricky part about that is you can't make those numbers so big that your community just looks at them and goes, that's funny money. That's never going to, you know, because I'm sure if 99 is looking at these right now, they'll say, no, well, we did this for cheaper, we did this for cheaper, because they're dealing in real dollars in 2020 versus $2,029. So they are inflated. But to answer your question, yes, can we scale back? To answer some of your questions, when you look at things like flexible furniture, can you then pair, well, what exactly does that mean? Miscellaneous site improvements, what exactly does that mean? Can you parse out that list and say, well, I'll tell you what that means. It means your outside building envelope. It means your marquee signs. It means your bathrooms. It means painting. It means carpeting. All of those things absolutely can. I mean, the list can become a mile long, so you got to be a little bit careful with that. But all of these things can be pared back, but again, not to the point where we're not going to be able to. We have to put in some inflationary numbers because of where the market's at. But yeah, I do think you always have wiggle room in some of these numbers.
Steve, to answer your question, I thought about it. I think what we're doing with addressing your list, you said aging buildings, overcrowding, future-ready learning, the fact that we have 13 buildings to maintain and have ownership over. I think what we're addressing with the conversations we're having here and with the community are around aging buildings and overcrowding. I don't think we're addressing any of the other things. And I think those are the right conversations to be having, because those are the most very real near-term needs that we're facing as a board.
Right. You start with your most pressing things, and I think there is a delicate balance between being transparent and throwing so many things out there that no one can actually see and understand what we're talking about. So how do we refine down to our starting point? Hey, for the next 2 to 3 years, this is really what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on improving these buildings in these ways. We're going to whatever those key points are, and the hard part, like the debate that we're having here, is all very interesting, and because no, there's no but. It's all very interesting because this is the same fight I've been having in my brain, and I was expecting to get a little bit more feedback in those, maybe to be a little bit further along in the task force, right? Like to go, here is, not just these bullet points, but here's what's underneath that. What are our trim points? Like, if maintenance is truly important, but we think we need to get that down to closer to $80 million, is there a way to do that? And I just don't feel like we've had that conversation yet. So, in a lot of ways, this is like reaffirming the demons that have been battling me in my head as I lay in bed at night, but leave me just as torn walking into this meeting. On next steps, like where we go from here.
So in plans, there was a thing that was handed out at the task force. Maintenance years 1 through 8. This Plan C was $69 million, and that I checked line by line to see. It looked like the electrical upgrades were significantly less, because you were taking air conditioning off the table.
Correct. Right.
So, I mean. There's we could test middle schools and the maintenance and take air conditioning off and to get back to why we're all here tonight, so are we saying no, we don't want this is as it is, that we need to come up with a different plan A and B?
That's what I'm saying.
I'll sum up my perspective. I'm not putting my name on $226 million if there's no plan in the future.
What do you mean by that last part?
So, how do we sustain this model of asking for $226 million for today to cover the next 8 years, but we don't, I appreciate the candid answer of what year 9 looks like, but we don't have an answer of what year 9 looks like. So we're going to ask for somebody to raise their taxes, give or take 10% for the next 20 years, but we don't have a plan for year 9.
Just to say something real quick, in the maintenance side of it, remember, we've been doing maintenance for decades, and the way that we...
But now we have a bill for $97 million.
We do have a bill for $97 million. Part of that is just the pure age of our building and getting us over. There is a big hump to this. But also, figuring into that $97 million is 8 years worth of maintenance. 8 years worth of maintenance that we would have been spending money on during those 8 years. So by taking that pressure off there, that allows us to create some policies out of the Financial Advisory Committee, things like that, stuff that has been lacking for the last couple of decades, and going, we need to earmark money for certain things. We need to make sure that we're earmarking money for a fund balance. We need to make sure that we're earmarking money in a sinking fund or whatever we're going to end up calling it. I know that's not the popular term that we want to keep, but right now that's what we call it. But right now it is untouchable because our fund balance hasn't been there. We haven't been funding it in the right way. If we can get over this hump, we can create policy around that that really sets real boundaries on what our ed fund actually looks like, and allows us, I think, to put better budgets together that we haven't had. And we get sort of a reprieve of 8 years of maintenance, and it allows us to tee up a little bit better to handle that next 12 years in that 20-year cycle. It's not perfect, but that does that takes the pressure off of our non-referendum bonds and things like that we have out there, plus our savings accounts. It's not going to be perfect, but it is going to be still teeing us up in the best way forward. That makes sense, right? You know what I'm saying? I think
and point taken that we have been maintaining our buildings.
Yeah. Just I think one of the things is, again, the new superintendent coming in. It's not that there hasn't been and I'm not suggesting you're suggesting this, Steve. It's not that there hasn't been a desire to fund a lot of these maintenance projects. The limiting rate is so low in terms of your operating funds. It's, where do we spend the dollars from? It just isn't there. In 2007, the community did go and ask for a referendum that was rejected, and so we've been living on kind of the shoestring budget, as a result of that, you just haven't been able to dedicate the dollars that you wanted to in terms of maintenance. So I think one of the things that I'm struggling with as a superintendent, I think, quite frankly, all of you are struggling with, there's so many things that we haven't ruled in or out yet that it's struggling to get to that final, okay, let's find a parameter that we can work with. So I do think guardrails for the task force from the board would be very helpful as we move forward. Greg threw out, and I'm not suggesting in or out or anything, but no to air conditioning, or no to 6-8 middle schools, or no to this. So then you can kind of start paring back some of these numbers. But I want to remind everybody where we were at with the task force. We started in December. It's a slow march to June. So in my view, June is where you develop your Plan A and your Plan B that you will then go and test. And that's where you spend the summer doing that. So again, we're still looking at options and trying to get to that march to Plan A and Plan B. So we're not there yet. I think what we're struggling, though, is because there's so many moving pieces, I think all of us fear that we're never going to be able to get there unless we start to rule some things in and out. Whether that's a dollar amount that provides us with a guardrail or some of these concepts, that's where I'm at as the superintendent, where I think it's even difficult for the task force, because this conversation was played out at 7 different tables at the task force meeting. It's the exact same thing that we're all kind of struggling with, is how do you prioritize all of these things. I will tell you bluntly, and I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, the maintenance of these buildings and where our buildings are at has got to be addressed. Whether it's our roofs, whether it's our parking lots, whether it's our restrooms, the maintenance of our buildings has got to be addressed.
I think the important question that's in the trade-offs for the community is, when we say that maintenance needs to be addressed, to your point, Steve, about what's the plan for the future, 51 to 92-year buildings, how much longer until a new building is going to be needed versus the plug the holes of existing buildings? And then the second question is, if we have money from the community to do maintenance, will we choose to invest maintenance into buildings that are either undercrowded or underutilized, or are nearing the state of which they are beyond repair, and we would have to significantly, the maintenance is not worth the sunk cost, and hence we start thinking about preparing future boards for new buildings in those spaces. Because those are the things that would blindside a community, right? You would blindside a community to say, we just approved $97 million of maintenance, but by the way, your building not getting the maintenance because of these reasons. Or you just approved safety and security, but we're not going to invest in these buildings in particular because we don't think that those are viable. Answering those questions of, do we foresee in the next 20 years us closing one of the buildings, either because it's too old or it's underutilized? And if we see that in the next 10 years, the next 5 years, and the next 20, I think we as a board need to just be honest with the community that that is very much in part of the calculus, because it's a 92-year-old building, or because it is at 30% of capacity.
Does anybody? How do you? Who do we ask to assess Whittier as the oldest building? I mean, it's 93 years old. 92 years old. So. That's your first question.
I think that's my first question.
Is that so old that we wouldn't want to? Is it a bad investment to put money more money? I don't know how to answer that question, but I'm sure if we could find what you could.
I don't. So I've asked some of those questions, and I don't want to speak for our architect because they could. Right. I know where I'm over my skis, and that would be one of them. But I did ask, are these buildings worth investing? We get the question all the time. Let's just tear down the 2 middle schools and just build 2 new ones. And, where's the cost? Right. I can tell you the cost is much more astronomical than what we're proposing. You are right, though. So when I look at this, I get accused of oversimplifying things, but you hear this term teeing up. District 99 has done a very nice job of teeing up the community for just about every 20 years to anticipate what the next change is. So you had the building boom in Downers Grove in 1950 with the baby boomers, and that's where you went from a very small amount of schools to large amount of schools. When do those schools need to be replaced? Generally speaking, you're talking about 100-year buildings, and that's when they get replaced if they haven't been maintained to the level that ours have been maintained. I still think you have at least 40 more years, and again, this is just me talking, in many of these facilities, if you are able to put the maintenance in here that you're talking about. Yes, would it be nice to completely tear these down and build new middle schools? Sure, but those are about, estimates about 80 to 90 million. A new elementary school, we know that one was built in the next town over, that was about $45 million. And so, when you look at that, and that was building about 600 kids. So I think you've got 40 more years or so if you maintain these buildings and what's proposed. But then after that, yeah, you are going to have to start talking about building more schools, replacing buildings. Absolutely, that's going to be on the horizon, for sure.
But at 40 years, it's an investment worth making. If it was at 10 or 15 years, it becomes a lot harder. And when we were still doing our strategic planning process, I had an opportunity I was just chatting with some of the people from White, and I got a similar kind of perspective that Whittier has been fairly well maintained. You look at its counterpart, Longfellow, which has not been maintained in the same manner, and that does not have that same level of longevity, which is one of the reasons why we're talking about one is not investing any more money in that building.
And just to jump into the conversation, when you look at Downers Grove North High School, I think that's a perfect example. Built in 1929, the original section. They're not talking about abandoning that building, but if you walked in there in 1929 versus 2020, the whole thing has been gutted to the point where you're really just looking at the old exterior bricks and those great floors in there, but everything else is pretty much updated. So in order to keep these buildings viable at a place like a Whittier or some of our buildings that are 60 years old like a Fairmount, you're talking about replacing the gut, but the bones of the building, so to speak, are still in working shape.
What I'm hearing is we would not be closing buildings and rebuilding them in the next 20 years, and that feels right based on the data that we have at this moment. Obviously, anything could change. Then the next question, I think, is do we as a board foresee in the next 5, 10, 20 years possibly downsizing the 13 buildings that we have as our footprint today?
I think that's something we need to look at on an annual basis, like regardless of what we think now, right? Like, we always talk about Longfellow, right? That's an asset that has a lot of potential if we divest that, right?
But I'm saying the 13 buildings, 13 schools.
Right, so closing schools that don't have full,
We have an estimate
and we
of
don't
about
have a
$3 million
demographic
net
report that's going to say
revenue
that
we get
it's
from
going to
Longfellow. Yes.
get bigger.
So I can answer your question in these terms. What I think about as the superintendent, you've got, I think, a lot of potential for the two administrative centers in rethinking that whole concept. I think those are certainly two assets that you could, in the next 20 years, and should, quite frankly, get off of your books. We can have further conversations, and we will, about what does that mean for the admin center. I also think you're going to have some opportunities in the school district should you want to look at your 13 configurations differently in terms of your buildings. You could have an opportunity where you look at one of your smaller enrolled schools and look at creating an early childhood center. You could, when you look at how many kids we have in early childhood, you're about 200, so to speak. Some of our smaller schools, you're about 200. So can you get creative in maybe redistributing and look at how you're meeting the needs of early childhood and administration and maybe combine some of those? Absolutely, you could. And I think you're going to have that conversation. But again, back to your original point, it doesn't change the maintenance needs for the school district in those 13 buildings that we have. No matter who you put in there.
Yeah, my read from the demographic study when we got it was Downers Grove is in this natural ebb and flow where the south side of town was overcrowded at one point, and now the north side of town is overcrowded at some point. And it takes like 7 wards to see the transition, right? And we as a board are facing the challenge on the north side of town, typically with some of our buildings at overcrowding. But is it the general pulse of this board that in 2042 we're going to have the same questions about does Highland really need this much space? Because it is no longer having the population, or are we seeing a demographic trend in the next 20, 30 years that's going to be different than what our historical trend has been, where we see this natural ebb and flow between the south side of town and north side of town?
So what I see in the data, and John Miller's pointed this out, our population in terms of kids in Downers Grove really stays the same. Right. It's where those kids attend school has changed. So, we were looking at some of the data earlier. In 96, El Sierra had 400 kids. And that makes sense because if you look at where we were in the 90s, the south side of town was booming, the north side of town was, and that's completely flipped. I do think what you're going to see in a landlocked town this close to the train in a desirable community is you will start to see some of the building take place on the south side of town, and you'll start to see that. You're already seeing that, by the way. At Kingsley School is probably a wonderful example. Fairmount School is another great example. So do I think that the enrollment will stay about the same? Yes. Am I a demographer? No, but what I see happening is that as the people who are buying these big homes on the north side of town, as their kids go through, they're going to stay in them a little while, and then you'll start to see that phenomenon happen on the south side of town, and that will continually flip until the whole town has recycled itself. So again, taking buildings offline, I would use terminology like you can repurpose buildings and flex space in there with your admin and early childhood, and that's how, to me, you get through some of those tougher times in low enrollment, but I don't see that 5,200 kids disappearing from Downers Grove, and we end up in a place where we have 4,000 kids in our school district. I think you're going to stay consistently around that.
We have a balance problem more than we have a space problem, and then I can't remember who I was chatting with, but part of the problem is like some of our buildings where they're at, we're now limited on our ability to expand on them. I think the last time we did the Lester edition, none of that structure is capable of being built up on.
Right.
And you have to have so much green space, and it's got houses on one side, houses on the other side, and the street, right? So we had to eat in the parking lot. We couldn't eat into the grass to build last time, and we couldn't expand that parking lot then to go into the additional grass space to account for that. We just lost hard surface space. And I don't know how many of our buildings have that, but I know that we are going to we do have some limitations on where our expansions and stuff can be in the future. So that's where it may not necessarily be building closings, it may be boundary redrawing. If you truly wanted to consolidate in this district, there would probably have to be a much bigger project that involved consolidating multiple schools and building a brand new facility, which, looking at the debate that we're having right here with these dollar amounts is probably not something that's happening within the next couple of decades. But so I think there's a lot of challenges in predicting the future. So what do we do to?
So going back to why we're here. What's our takeaway? What are we telling Paul and Kevin to do?
So I think there's way too much information without information to follow up on this. I find it extremely confusing, and I'm on the board.
You're talking about the attachment.
The attachment.
Yes, I agree.
Again, I don't know if it works in regular stuff, but I know from working for the government and for not-for-profits, you usually shoot for top and 8th grade level, and this is way more than that. Just because not everyone is a college-educated person. And so that's usually the standard. And I think there is just a lot of information on this, and people are going to only read parts and then be very confused and get upset or something. There's just too much. This is too much. This is fine.
This feels like a binary choice to me.
Yes,
I think
that as well.
People aren't going to read the words, and they're going to look at this, and I don't care what we use. They're going to go, there's two options here, and they're both astronomical.
Really expensive,
right? And so I think my question to the group is, what is our next step? What is our next action that we want to take place? And we should be writing a letter to them. Great. With a call to action to do that. If the goal is to get people into a room for a community engagement session,
right?
What is that community engagement session going to look like so that we have people mentally prepared to walk in that room and dialogue on those things? I think that, to me, is if we don't just want to come up with the numbers on our own and just start building this on our own, if we're doing this where we're engaging with the community, then we've got to make sure we write a letter that tees up them coming in the room, and we've got to make sure that we're ready to talk about in more granular detail what's in there to find out and understand where people's hot points are, to try to make sure that we cover as many of the concerns that people have, make sure we're educating them about the maintenance problems that we have and what it means in the buildings for them, so that when they go back out to the community, they have a good understanding and feel heard when we come up with a final design. But
I called a bunch of people after the last task force that were in the room to get their takeaway from the evening. And a lot of people, Paul, that I spoke to, in fact, everyone, said that they felt like March 24th was too long, that they actually they felt rushed at the end and thought there could have been even more talking than there was, and they wish that it wasn't going to be stalled out as long as it was. Is it possible, like you were talking about guardrails, to have another task force? Now that this is the first time that any of us have been able to be in a room together and talk about it. So I'm so sorry for like all the work that you and Paul have done, but like maybe now that we're like, everyone says, okay, this is that we go back to the task force and say, we need you to start paring it down even more before we go make a phone call.
Well, first off, you never have to apologize for making us do work. I mean, this is all part of the process. I mean, the sausage making is not pretty as you go through this. I'm not going to speak for Paul, but I'll speak for myself. I'm concerned with getting something out there that is accurate and right and that people will support. So I think Paul hinted to this earlier. We need to take a step back with some of this. That's what keeps spinning through my head. Like,
I feel like there's another step
are we
need to
asking
add.
the task force to get together and further filter some of
I
this
think
down?
that
So if you're asking me as the superintendent, would I be willing to do that? Of course we would. I'm not concerned about bringing the task force back together earlier and say, here's some feedback we got from the board. So if that's the direction the board wants to go, then we're okay with that.
But
I love the idea of bringing the task force back. I just want to read some of my notes that I took this year. First of all, you have a really smart board. You have a really smart superintendent. And I like the fact that you're doing a reality check instead of just saying, yeah, Paul, that sounds great. Let's go test this $226 million, right? I wake up at 4 in the morning worrying about it, so that's not a good sign.
me too,
Somebody
Paul.
mentioned we only have one opportunity. I totally agree. We need to get it right the first time. I agree with that. We have limited attention in terms of voters. I mean, people are so busy right now that you're absolutely right about that. My hunch is that we need to get this number down below 149 million as a plan A and something like 110 as a plan B. I'm just throwing that out.
I like
That tax impact all of a sudden goes down to like $209 and $155 for a $300,000 home. We should bring the task force back together. The buck stops with you guys. You have to sign the letter, right? They're not signing the letter. You have to sign the letter. So if you're not comfortable with it, then we shouldn't be doing it. The reason that letter is way too long, which you just mentioned, and it's so long because we're trying to make the case for grade reconfiguration. That takes up 3/4 of the letter. What we should be trying to make the case is that we have 51 to 92-year-old buildings, and that's crazy, right? Super old buildings, and they're falling apart. And it's not for a lack of trying to maintain them. It's just that they're old and they need to be fixed. And I know for a fact that the other big thing is our secure vestibules. It would be a shame, I think, not to at least have that as a big talking point with the community, because I think it's super important. And we had a gentleman in the room who's super fiscally conservative, and he doesn't even have kids in the public schools. He has kids in the private schools. And he said the only way that I would ever support this is if it had something to do with security, which was the case with District 99. And I think that holds true with a lot of voters. So I would bring them back. I'd say, hey, this number's way too big. As far as grade reconfiguration, can we test it somehow? Like maybe in a poll, but it'd have to be some kind of, if you want to bring the numbers way down, it'd be maybe some kind of split-off sample where we test grade configuration. And, oh, by the way, it costs $54 million. Would you support it? We already know what the answer is. But if the task force feels like we really have to test it, then we have to test it.
What do you mean we already know what the answer is?
Say that again?
What does he mean we already know the answer to that? About 54.
Yeah.
You're saying that people would say no?
The answer with the taxpayer is going to be no. I don't even have to poll right now.
Yeah, that helps.
But I guess
Really, I would bet you a really nice steak dinner right now that they're going to say no.
But Paul, I agree 100% with you, but I guess I'm looking at it in hindsight. How did we get to this point where we wanted to bring it to the community only to, you know what I mean? Like,
it was the recommendation of the task force.
But we went through the strategic planning process.
And it was one of the number one things that came out of strategic planning.
So, like, was that a waste of time? You know, I guess I'm just trying to say.
Think about
People want what
think
they
about
want,
who
but they don't want to
engages
pay
in
for
this
it.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's
People
not-
want a high-quality education, but they don't want to pay for it.
So-
And
Champagne taste on a beer
That's
budget.
right.
But it's like my 65-year-old neighbor across the street who would be a no vote on that. He's not participating in strategic planning, and he's not participating in this task force. I mean, we're not hearing from the entire community.
Well-
But we would hear from the entire community as soon as Paul goes out and starts polling people, and they're going to say no. We're hearing from parents mostly, and probably well-to-do parents, quite frankly.
I'm on board with for us to debate either delegating to the task force or us starting to write the letter, either way, on maintenance, safety, and security.
Yes.
And starting to test some of those numbers. I still think the 146, even the 110, feels really high. And Paul, I'd love your advice on do we as a board need to be testing a number that we think will get us to 50% plus one of the vote, and that's what we want to be able to get data back on, or should we be testing things that feel really high but also are super important, even if we're going to end up getting phone polling that tells us it's in the low double-digit percentage ranges? Help me understand how to grapple with that polling question.
Yep. So when we poll, we want to get 56 to 58% support. Some pollsters will want 60% support to feel comfortable that it has a chance of passing. Because after we do the polling, people look for a reason to vote no. We also have a margin of error of 5.66%. So, that's where it stands. So we don't just need, 50.5% support. We need a much stronger number than that.
I think we need to be able to, if we're going to go back to the task force, I think we need to be very specific on what the ask is. I think we need to be able to ask for what is it that you think the community will surely support, and tell us what that package looks like, what it includes and what that number is, and then what is the reach goal that you want us to be able to start to build community support around that you think that we need as a district, and you think that with education the community will support.
I don't think the task force has really its fingers on the pulse of what they think the community will support, and we have the proof right here.
Well, what I think we need to do is help build a priority. I think if we have some numbers. Paul, do you think we should be considering an option 3 that gets us out of the 9-digit, out of a 9-digit number and gets us below that 100 million mark as well?
Sure. It's just that your maintenance item is 97.3 million. The only item that was eliminated in years 9 through 12 is roofing.
Yes.
Right? So it's roofs. I mean, your superintendent's correct. I mean, there are ways to bolster your savings and to do some other things to try and address roofing, in years 9 through 12. So I wouldn't get too concerned about those particular years.
You could do maintenance 1 through 8 for 69.8 with the downgraded electrical upgrades, and do secure vestibules, and that'll get you $80 million.
Okay, I like it.
But that doesn't get you Lewis air conditioning.
But no air conditioning.
Okay.
That is correct.
I believe that we are
Give that option
shortchanging
too,
our community. I think we could ask for, based on the tax numbers, I think we could ask for 150 to 180, and just because. I just think that we are asking for too low. I think there has to be that play of working with the polling and the thing where we think that they want super low, and we obviously want 226, but there has to be something in the middle that both will agree on. And I think keeping it under 100 is too low. We're not going to get what we need.
I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is you have 3 options, sort of a low, medium, and high, and people can measure what they have to give up at each level, and then do that. And we test those numbers and find out what people, because there's core things that we have to do. There's things that we really, really should do, and there's things that are going to be nice to do, and then there's our dreams, and so we gotta get.
We've tried to test 3 in the past, and it came back where we get 35% Plan A 33% Plan B, it doesn't help us much.
Okay.
I think it's important to just define 2 proposals, and ideally to do a split sample, just like District 99, where half the sample here's one, half the sample here's the other. We come back and say, here it is. And if we're going to have to go to your Plan C, which is potentially a sub 100.
The only thing I want to say, kind of following up with Karat, is that it's not the dollar amount that I necessarily. I mean, the dollar amount we're testing, but it's gotta. The dollar amount doesn't mean anything without the correlating data of what's going to happen. Yeah. So, like, it's not to me about testing a number and saying what number do people have a stomach for. Mm-hmm. To me, it's about saying what can our community get behind in building for our schools that they're actually willing to fund. So I think tying this together with what worked, and that's why going back to the task force and finding a way to start trimming this up and coming back between the administrative staff here and Paul's team and White and company, finding things that we could do to trim this up to get it into that 150, 160 mark and the 110-ish mark is probably a best step for us. So are we leaning to sending nothing out at this point and doing that and going back to the task force prior to ever doing any more community outreach? That's kind of where we're at, right?
That's kind of what I'm hearing. One of the other things that Tracy's done a really nice job, and Darren has as well, making sure that we reconnect with the members of the task force. I've asked some pretty conservative members of the task force to meet me for coffee and breakfast, just so I can hear what the other side is. So one of the things that I would encourage us to also have a conversation about is, I'm hearing from people on the task force saying, I know you need money. This is an exact quote. I know you need money. Nobody's doubting that your buildings are old and that you need money. But I want to hear what you are doing to make that number as small as possible. So for instance, what you're taking away, what are you willing to do differently as a school district so that you can convince me that you are running a lean machine, not to the point where we're taking away things from our kids, but what are you doing? And Steve, I suspect that's where you're coming from with some of the points that you've made.
Yeah, and I'm not articulating them well at all.
No,
but
but
I
you
feel
are.
like when any, I kind of put my mom's perspective on, like, she's going to get this $226 million, and, she's going to go to the chart, and it's like, well, how did we get here? And, like, what are they really doing to kind of, cut costs, find cost savings opportunities, cost avoidance, and I just don't feel like we have a good story to tell at this point in time.
We don't.
So you would agree with that?
Absolutely. I don't agree that we don't have a good story to tell. We have been on a shoestring budget for as long as I've heard, and we've been one of the lowest tax districts in the county, and we've been plugging holes with existing and aging buildings for probably 30 years past when we should have been. And so not having gone to the community and gotten support for significant investment is what's been up. That's the story. And we have an ebb and flow naturally in the district for the last 50 years of south side, north side, that we are going to continue to face some very real challenges, and every neighborhood school is facing different ones. But I don't agree that we don't have a good
That's
story.
That's our history. I think in how we're spending this money, right? When we're asking, how do we show that we're taking these dollars and we're going to use them wisely, and we're plugging every hole that we need to plug, and I think we just got to tell that, and that's where refining.
Well, and ensuring that in 10 years, like Steve was saying, we're not going to have to come back and ask for more. I think that's the point too. Is not so much the past, but the future, and how is this going to, not this, but the other version of this.
Something like that.
How is that going to ensure that in 10 years or 15 years or whatever, we're not doing the same thing again?
And if we have a good story to say, the bonds are going to come off, we're going to reissue those bonds, we're going to have fund balance, we're going to put money in our savings accounts, but I'm still skeptical on that narrative, right? Because we haven't really discussed that as a board. Yeah,
so you're actually helping, and Paul, jump in. I'm making a bridge too far, but I think you're helping, because one of the things that we were debating in the task force after meeting number 2 is should we go out and do almost a two-step process, which is different than what District 99 did. District 99 got to their end at the task force and said, okay, here's our plan A, here's our plan B, this is what we're going to go test, and then depending on what we got, then guess what, superintendent and all the cabinet and everybody else, and you're going to go out there and sell this to the community. What we were just proposing was that we would do kind of a step one, is we would test some things, and then we would go talk about that based on the feedback. We would use that to then eventually get to our plan A and our plan B. So what I'm hearing from the board, and again, push back because I wouldn't be the first time I misheard something, is that you want us to do more of a 99 style type of thing where we get to this plan A and plan B. At the end, we test that, and then we go and sell that. We can have community engagement sessions along the way, depending on the feedback we get from the board in shaping that plan A and plan B. But what you're not talking about is go out in there and specifically test dollar amounts at this point, because we still have to flush out what that eventual plan A and plan B will get. Paul, is that what you're hearing as well? You froze there for a little bit. I thought I stumped you. Yeah.
My blood pressure has gone way down if you decide to do it that approach, which is to define plan A and plan B with help from the task force, and just saying the board said, hey, it's too big and they feel uncomfortable even testing it. And so we need you to come back and come up with some tighter numbers that likely don't include grade reconfiguration unless somehow the architect could pull some number out of their hat, which probably isn't going to happen.
We'll make them try,
I think that's the way to do it. But
I'm fully supportive of that.
I feel like we're not giving the task force enough direction. To Steve's point, the story feels incomplete, because imagine that we invest in maintenance and safety and security around the 110, 149 range, whatever those numbers are. We still have an overcrowding problem in, call it, about 3 or 4 of our buildings, and we have to answer back to the community on our how we are going to address that. And maintenance and safety and security don't do that. And so, to complete the story, the very clear, quote unquote, fires that we have to fight now, this current board will have to answer. If we go to the community with this, what's our answer to those? Because a maintenance, safety, and security plan doesn't address it.
Right. So here's what I heard from the task force about some of those overcrowding things is not to mix the two things together, but a commitment to, if you're going to make this maintenance push, what is the next step and what can you commit to as a board, whether that's a boundary task force, whether that's an overcrowding task force, to make sure that those issues get addressed and you prove to the public that you're going after those. So I don't know what we had thrown out ideas like, and I hate to form another committee or another task force, but
I was going to say something else.
I saw your face. No, but one of the things that Justin's over. One of the things I think we have to be very careful with the overcrowding issue in particular, because we heard from people who are on the task force that live in the Highland area that is west of Main Street, where that was considered for them to perhaps move over to Bel Air. One of the things they kept saying was that felt so rushed because we believed it wouldn't have fixed your problem, but yet it was a way too quick of a solution. We need more of a study. We need more of a long-term plan in terms of relieving that overcrowdedness. Or do we just need to, think of, and I hate to throw a term like this out, but mobile classrooms until we just get over the hump for a couple of years. And, so those things, they really felt like we needed to flush that out more, not mix it, but really commit to flushing that out and having a deadline where we make solid recommendations to the board.
Well, this conversation went a little differently than I expected walking into it, but
it's exactly what I expected.
But I think, like what Paul said, is that my blood pressure lowered a little bit as well, because this was not. I think that the direction that we were going was putting a stamp on it that this was a direction that the board was looking to go, and that was not something I was comfortable with. I didn't feel like this was representing, but we hadn't really had a chance to have this dialogue, and so that, this is really good. The question is, what is that timeline going to look like for us to get together with the task force and put that out there so that we can get good turnout there and a good turnaround on this? And is there anything that we can do to set them up for success in advance when they walk in the room? Since this is not what they were expecting us to come back with.
I'm looking at my calendar in terms of trying to answer that question. So we had 4 community engagement sessions tentatively planned, which you saw on there, which I think we can use a few of those dates to bring the task force back together. I think the task force, and this is just me and Tracy, Justin, you were in the room as well, feel free to jump in. I think they want to come back together. I really do. I think you've got a committed group that would definitely want to come back and weigh in, especially our staff members on the task force. I think they want to weigh in as well on this. So I think we could get them back in late February, early March without an issue within the next couple of weeks. You're never going to get all 40 of them to be able to commit to it, but I think if we can bring them back relatively quickly, depending on Paul's schedule, Marcia's schedule, I think we can. What I want to be careful of is when we bring them back, that we've got really good, clear talking points and directions from the board. So they need to feel fulfilled when they come in here, and if we just have kind of a 3-hour open discussion, we're not going to get there. So, right. But I definitely think we can bring them back in a matter of weeks, whether that's 2 or 3 weeks down the road.
So then, to Paul and to you, Kevin, do you have what you need from us to take a next step? We can also put a discussion item on our next board meeting, which is next Monday, if in the next week you come up with additional questions for guidance that you need for that meeting, so that you have the pulse of the board going into it if there's anything missing. But I just want to make sure that that we don't have to wait to get into March to get some guidance for you there. So if there's something you need now, we can do that. Or if something comes up here in the next few days, that's something that we can make sure we put as a discussion point on our February 10th meeting as well.
So I have what I need as long as I can make some clarifying questions from the board. And Paul, feel free to jump in. What I'm hearing from you tonight, and again, push back if this is not what I'm hearing, is that you're looking for more of a District 99 type of model. By the end of the task force, we're going to get to a Plan A and a Plan B that we can test. What I'm not hearing from you is that any of these items should be taken off the table, but we got to find a way to drastically lower this number in a Plan A and then a Plan B. I like Paul's starting point, but Jill, I'm not, forgetting what you said of kind of Paul throwing out there, 149, 110, but still be open to some more of those conversations. So I think I can certainly, work out kind of a tentative plan with Paul, and then even if we wanted to have a discussion point at the next board meeting, I feel like I've got pretty good marching orders on how to move forward here. I just want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting anything that the Board of Education is saying here.
I just want to clarify one thing, because I think we made a giant leap from we want to do everything to we only want to address aging buildings and overcrowding. Is that something we want to articulate so it's clear and concise moving forward?
I think the maintenance needs to be emphasized, that these are things that have to be done, we have to find a way. But I can understand where Jill's coming from, where she's saying, let's not underestimate what they might say. I do think that there could be room for an option that might include some sort of grade level configuration, some sort of 6 to 8 possible option. If you can, like we talked about, a la carting out some of these other things and saying maybe we can do 6 to 8 and maintenance if we get rid of something on other things under other options. Can we figure out a way to have that be a possible option, including maintenance
and maybe that one's a little higher.
Yes, and maybe that's a little higher, and then we have, I don't know, I think having only 2 plans
They don't
I
have,
struggle
they don't
with
have to
that.
come up with two plans. They can come, I think we can see
need to.
multiple plans that are within that range.
Right.
Here's a version that has reconfiguration, here's a
Right.
version that doesn't.
Yeah.
I think when we go to the community, we have to have
Plan.
two.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But for
Okay.
the task
So
force,
along
I'm
the
saying
line.
I think at some point we got to look at options that can get us to around 150, 60, 70, 100, 110, 120. Like, get us into those ballparks so that we can start having a dialogue around it. My problem is I can't sink my teeth in the fact that we're at $226 million, and you're telling me maintenance has to be $97.3 million. It looks like I can't.
It could be 90. It could
I
be
understand.
69.8.
Right, but those are the things now we got to start. Here's a version with it like this. Let's start versioning this stuff out,
Yeah.
and then we can take a look at it and say, wow, there is a version with reconfiguration. Maybe we should test that.
Yeah.
Or right now we were trying to do that, a little too early. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was wondering, at what point, or do we not, ask for staff input since they're the ones who are working in the buildings, and are they leaning towards 6 through 8, where we have a consensus from you guys?
So I'll answer that, and Katie, one of the things that we felt very strongly about setting the task force up is that our staff is there with our community having the conversations.
Okay.
Katie and I met this week and we talked about community engagement sessions. I think it is extremely powerful to have the staff with the community having those conversations together.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is, I participated this where I live in Lisle 202, and I thought it was extremely powerful to have the staff in the conversations with us because
Sure.
they can point out things that if you have them separate, you'll never be
Okay.
able to do that. But I want to compliment Katie. Katie and I have probably met, 4 times already? Katie meets before every task force meeting with me and
Right.
after every
Okay.
task force meeting to make sure that our staff, has their voice heard. In terms of the whole 6-8 middle school concept,
Right.
I can tell you that if you go back to the last spring,
Right.
our staff or the council recommended that we pursue 6-8. They didn't say you must adopt. They would never say that. They certainly said we must pursue that. But Katie, I'll turn it over to you to kind of weigh in.
Yeah, I think the staff is ready to offer their input whenever the time is right. And that's kind of been what some of Kevin and my conversation has been, is how do we get that staff input? Is it through the community sessions? Do we use, just in terms of PGEA, do we use one of our, we have set days that we can meet, and do we bring in Paul and Kevin, whoever that might be, to get the staff up? Because I think part of it is, too, they need to be brought up to speed about what these conversations are. So we have a union meeting on Wednesday. I'm glad I attended tonight, because that message would have been much different having met with Kevin Friday than it will now be that I report on Wednesday. So, just as a little background, Craig had asked me to serve in this because I am a taxpayer and he's not, so letting me have both of those roles and represent our staff or our union. So we're ready, and I think the staff is on board and will do whatever it is, but they're kind of, I think, waiting for their
Right.
invitation.
Good.
For that.
I just wanted to make sure, because I feel like by cutting out air conditioning, we're asking professionals to teach in an environment that is not professional, and since we are not at the top pay, we are going to end up losing people if we are not going to have air conditioning for 20 years.
So that's, Jill, that's
So
one of my...
So that, I am just concerned about that when we started taking, not about kids, absolutely, but we have heard from them that it is impossible to teach in these situations. So we're
Yeah.
asking them to do something so I feel like air conditioning is not, but again,
And so one
neither
of the
here
things that I
nor
want to make
there.
clear with the board that I didn't hear from all of you, but again, I didn't hear to take anything off this table yet.
Okay.
What I heard was bring the dollar amount down.
Dollar amount
How
down.
the task force chooses to recommend. So air conditioning
Right.
to me isn't off the table. Grade
Okay.
6-8 isn't off the table. Maintenance isn't off the table. I'll tell you, all of them together probably is likely off the table, but how we configure that.
Make new baskets.
Yeah, so what I'm also hearing from the task force, though, is I got to go back and work with the architect, and my team does, to really, in Paul, I can see you there. We've got to further a la carte this list, if that even makes sense. But we really have to give people more options as we're looking through these things. So what I've heard is kind of guardrails set about dollar amounts here, but really to go back and ask the task force for more input on this, and then continue to loop you in on those conversations.
Task force needs to be part of the dialogue, but White is going to have to help on this, right? Like, they're going to, there's so many pieces that one thing impacts, another thing impacts, right? So they have to help us and give us guidance in ways that we can trim this. We have them because they're experts, and so we need to utilize them and say, start giving us some options that look more like these numbers and helping us start trimming back.
Do we have the next task force be on February 17th, that fast? At the first open community engagement one?
So the answer is yes, but I don't know if I'd recommend that at this point because of the work that I've got to now go back and do with White. I do think we should strike while the iron's hot with the task force. I want to give them enough notification, and I want to be able to work with White. I'm not suggesting that we push it all the way into March. I'd like to
potentially be February?
Oh, yeah. No, I think we can certainly do February. I just don't know if 2 weeks is realistic, but I certainly, and we're not bound by these 4 dates either. I think we can certainly look at the calendar. First thing I want to make sure is that we can find a date for you and Darren that will work. And then I'd really like to find a date with Paul and White and everybody else that can work for that, and then kind of backwards map what that looks like, including you, Katie. I want to make sure you're available on whatever date we pick. But I certainly think February is in play.
That's sooner than March 24th. So that's correct.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying we abandon the March 24th date either with the task force. I recommend you keep that and add an interim date in between.
Everybody that I spoke to that was on after the fact, they don't care how many at least obviously schedule permitting, but they didn't feel like it would be done exactly. They were totally willing and wanted to they genuinely wanted to meet again. They didn't feel like it was.
Are we giving enough direction to the task force on the packages to bring back to us? One, it sounds like what we're asking for is give us a few packages to grapple with that you think are viable alternatives, both from a number perspective and from what's included in it, the substance, to test with the community, and then ultimately as a board we have to make the call to pare that down to two plans. Is that the direction we're giving?
Yeah, 2 new baskets to pull, correct?
No, I think we're asking for more so that we can then pare it down to the ones that we want to pull.
Several back.
Yeah, you said before A1, A2,
yeah,
B1.
right. That's kind of how I feel.
Find some things that are in that lower range, find some things that are in that higher range, and then we can start having a better dialogue of what kind of plans we want to stamp on. If there is a way that it at 170 million or something like that, they could do grade configuration, we might say,
making cuts other places or something to make that work.
We might go, that sets us up for stability in our district better than doing something else, and we can make that choice. We might say it's not worth it, but that's a dialogue. I think at the end of the day, we have to put our name on this. Dr. Russell and his administrative team have to put their name on this, so we want to make sure that we...
Is there more direction we need to provide around your packages must include these table stakes? Maintenance needs that will get us past the next decade, because otherwise we have to go back to the community for that support. Those types of directions, so that we're not getting packages back that meet number requirements and look sellable, but ultimately don't actually get us to the point of...
When Tracy and I will be in the room, I think that's one of the things. Our core maintenance stuff we have to...
The 1 through 8 was hands down. I wrote the tally. Every single table, everyone was on board with 1 through 8 years. There was not a single dissenter.
I agree.
So I think that
it's a groupthink exercise. It's sure. I wouldn't put much emphasis on that.
On the maintenance.
No, just everyone agreeing that.
They didn't all agree on boundary changes. That was not completely uniform. There were some dissenters.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, but the maintenance was not.
And thanks, Darren and Tracy, for being part of that task force, because I would lose even more here.
Not even, but also, the amount of work outside of the task force. If we did our phone logs and all that, but again, all that work gets us closer to. Today's meeting, I don't want anybody to think that we're starting from scratch. We're not. This is actually helping me narrow it down and helping us get to a workable solution. So I appreciate the board coming in for a special meeting. It's so hard to have these conversations. This is the normal context of our meeting. So being able to come here and now share this back with the task force, I think is extremely helpful.
This is the first time we've all been able to talk.
So I'm going to ask a question of just things that I had heard from previous board members as far as referendum. I was understanding that once we vote as a board and put it on the ballot, we cannot be pro or con.
Correct. Yeah.
And is that even personally, we cannot have a sign in our front yard, that we cannot do canvassing, door-to-door stuff? What?
So I do not want to tell you yes or no, because I'll have to get an answer. But as a collective group of 7, and that includes the administration.
Right.
Once you commit to, yes, you're putting this on the ballot, we are in a position as a school district where we are allowed to give only informational material out. Here's when you can vote. Here's what this is.
Okay.
Here's what may happen if you don't. I can tell you some school districts, I think, cross the line on that and make themselves very vulnerable to litigation. But as a board and as a school district, yes, once we pass it over, then it goes to a non-profit or profit group that has sprung up, and if they want to carry the baton across the finish line, they can.
Okay.
On the flip side, you may see another group pop up, the anti, and you saw that with District 99. Now, in terms of you as an individual, Jill, I do believe you have some wiggle room there, but if we do get there and put something on the ballot as a Board of Education, we will have a clear guidance document from our attorney about the do's and don'ts, not only as a board and as a district, but as individual members as well.
I just wanted to make sure that I'm not doing anything, or none of us are doing something that would jeopardize.
Absolutely, and I will get you that clear guidance document in terms of the do's and don'ts for that. It's not uncommon also to have a board or the attorney at that meeting to kind of say, okay, now you've done this, here's kind of your marching orders from that point. As a board, as individuals, it gets a little different.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, anything else you need from us?
No, I think you made the right decision to postpone this and dial it in. And I love the idea of having the task force come up with a few scenarios, one of which includes grade reconfiguration, but at a more of a 175-ish kind of number.
I like that too. I do want to take a second and just note that both of you in our audience today, I see you guys at every single thing we go to, and you're the only 2 people here today, and it does not go unnoticed. I'm sure this is exactly how you wanted to spend a Monday night, but
that'll be next Monday.
Justin got to spend his morning with me and his evening. Right? I'm sure he's just loving it.
I so thoroughly appreciate how often I see both of your faces and how active you guys are in everything that we do. So thank you for being here tonight. Anything else before we wrap up?
I do have one other thing. In terms of communication to the task force, I want to make sure that I'm representing the board well, and I know Katie's going to go to her association meeting. I would also like to, inform all of our staff who may not be at the meetings, including our administrative staff. What I'm hearing from the board is that we'd like to reconvene the task force to gather further input, that there's concern around that big of a number. We don't know where we're at, and we'd like to bring the task force back together for some options. So what I'll do is I'll work out language on what that could look like over the next day or two and put something out to the Board of Education, and work through Darren and Tracy, the representatives on the task force. I just want to make sure that everyone is in the loop, and that way they know what's going on. But I definitely have to get something out there to the task force. So I would anticipate getting that out prior to the Friday update. The further you get away from this meeting, people will start asking some questions. So I'll certainly run that through Darren and Tracy and go from there if everyone's okay with that.
Thank you for sending out the note to all the people the day after the task force. It's little things like that that make a big difference. Being a parent that goes to all these council meetings and these committee things that they go to, they don't really get that feedback all the time, and so I think people appreciated hearing from you. Thank you for spending 4 hours with us. It which is what they did that night. So thank you for writing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just going to go here. Yeah, so we're not going to take any actions tonight. So with this is an opportunity, obviously, for any members of our audience to share in public comment with the board, but it's not intended to be a time for members of the public to enter into a dialogue. So is there anything else that you guys would like to...
The only thing I would say is that, I mean, I'll be part of the
Could you
next
please state
conversation,
your
but-
name and...
Island, Pennsylvania. And I maybe say this more as a parent, but also as a staff member. If you don't go the route of reconfiguration, I don't think you can wait till after a vote to address that space issue.
Right.
Is a concern. And not only for my children that are there, but for my colleagues that work there
Right.
too. And so to say that, task force may follow, I'm not sure will be timely enough for the support that we want from that community. So if that isn't the route that's chosen for Plan A and B, I think that as you tell that story, that has to be what are the plans for space, because their demographics report does not anticipate their numbers going down in the very foreseeable future.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin?
Please state your name.
All right. Then with that, we got a couple of announcements. Friday, February 7th at 7:30 a.m. is the legislative breakfast. Excited to do that. That's over at O'Neill Middle School. That's this Friday. You RSVP'd yet?
I know.
No, this is the whole reason why we
No.
do the announcement. So
Right.
Yes.
Assembly showed up.
Monday, February 10th at 3:45 p.m. will be the district leadership team meeting.
Is there about the district leadership team, do we still need to talk about whether we're going to go forward with that date or think about postponing?
I think at this point, we're looking at, does it make sense to have that the same night as a board meeting? So we could be potentially postponing that for 2 weeks, but we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet.
Okay.
So let's plan on
Just
it
so you
being
know.
there, but I wanted to talk to the two members first before I had a chance to announce that.
Yeah, this happens with the district leadership team quite a bit, where we start at 3:45,
Yeah.
so pretty late.
So we'll talk about that.
Oh, and Katie's there too, and Justin's there too. Yeah.
Why don't we huddle that?
Yeah. So maybe at 3:45 on Monday. Monday, February 10th at 6:30 p.m. is the board's community coffee with it's the community coffee with the board at the Downers Grove Village Hall, and then that'll be immediately followed at 7 p.m. on February 10th with the regular board meeting at Downers Grove Village Hall. With all of that said, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? All right. Any opposed? All right. Motion carried. The meeting is adjourned at 7:30 exactly.